to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we have a very short text from 2 Chronicles chapter 27. Jotham was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok, and he did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh according to all that his father Uzziah had done, except he did not enter the temple of Yahweh. But the people still followed corrupt practices. He built the upper gate of the house of Yahweh and did much building on the wall of Ophel. Moreover, he built cities in the hill country of Judah and forts and towers on the wooded hills. He fought with the king of the Ammonites and prevailed against them. And the Ammonites gave him that year 100 talents of silver, and 10,000 cores of wheat, and 10,000 of barley. The Ammonites paid him the same amount in the second and the third years. So Jotham became mighty, because he ordered his ways before Yahweh his God. Now the rest of the acts of Jotham, and all his wars and his ways, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. He was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And Jotham slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Ahaz his son reigned in his place. So as we continue on here with the line of kings, we have seen before this text 9 kings over Judah, Jotham now the 10th, and he's reigning for 16 years. He starts when he's 25 years old. So his time period here, it's in the ballpark of 749 BC to 733 or 732. It's in that rough range for the 16 years that he reigns. And his reign is described as good. It's described as doing right in the eyes of Yahweh. And so that brings our total of good kings who have done right in the eyes of Yahweh to 6, whereas we've had 3 who have done evil in the sight of Yahweh, plus also Abijah. Now, his doing right in the eyes of Yahweh here is described as having done all that his father Uzziah had done. And so that is being described as, just the following the footsteps of his father. His father had served the Lord in most of his life, and this was good. Now, there's an exception. So he's done what was right in the eyes of Yahweh, according to all his father had done, except he did not enter the temple. This is one just purely based on English grammar, where it's good to bring this up with your kids to ask the question, was it good or was it bad that Jotham did not enter the temple? The English grammar makes it sound like it was a bad thing. So he's done everything right in the eyes of the Lord by following the ways of his father, except he didn't do this thing. It makes it sound like he should have. But the except is not to the first clause. The except is not to what was right in the eyes of Yahweh. The except is to what his father Uzziah had done. And Uzziah, his father, had done this wicked thing of going into the temple, like actually into the temple, not just going to the temple courtyard, not offering sacrifices, but going into the temple itself, which was reserved only for the priests, and seeking to offer there on the altar of incense before the Lord an offering of his own, which again is only for the priests to do. And for this, Uzziah was struck with leprosy, and it's why Jotham is going to begin reigning before his father has even died. And we see that in chapter 26 yesterday, verse 21. King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death. Being a leper, lived in a separate house, for he was excluded from the house of Yahweh. And Jotham his son was over the king's household, governing the people of the land. So Jotham is going to not make the same mistake that his father made. It's a good thing that Jotham did not seek to enter the temple, because that was not his place. Even as king, right? We think of a king as being above all. Even our government leaders often act that way when they're not supposed to be, but they act that way. And many kings in this world's history have done so as well, that anything they want is theirs. Such is not true. God is still king over all, and the Lord has forbidden certain things, and so a king has no right, no authority before God to change that. Jotham recognizes this. He recognizes that what Uzziah, his father, has done is wrong. He saw that dad is now leprous from it, and he does not repeat his father's mistake. Unfortunately, the end of verse 2, the people still followed corrupt practices. So while Jotham is described as being a faithful king to Yahweh, the people don't follow that. The people continue with their pagan worship. They continue to celebrate the festivals of the Baals instead of seeking Yahweh, instead of bringing sacrifices to him and receiving forgiveness from him. They have sought their religion elsewhere. Then we learn in verse 3 that he built the upper gate to the house of Yahweh. This is probably, it seems most likely, a reference to a gate that would allow for the king from his palace to have quick and easier access to the temple. Again, not to go inside of it, but to enter into the temple courtyards, where at this time, appropriately, again, the sacrifices are being done. The priests are sacrificing on the altar of burnt offerings. You bring your animal for sacrifice to them. Some of them they killed, some of them you killed, depending on the sacrifices. So he's giving himself quicker access. I would view that as a good thing, right? That the king wants to be able to have an easy trip, a short trip to get to the temple. It means he's more likely to go. So I think that's a good move. And he also built upon the wall of Ophel, which was one of the southern areas of the temple. Then he also continued to build cities, forts, and towers in the hill country of Judah. So he's continuing to advance his country. He's continuing to make his nation stronger, more defensible. We have seen, however, in the past that does not matter. If the king is not faithful, that the Lord can give his people over. I shouldn't even just say the king. If the people are not faithful as a whole, the Lord will give them over, and it won't matter how fortified their cities are. Not when God's judgment comes. We saw this a couple of weeks ago here. 2 Chronicles chapter 11, Rehoboam built fortified cities in the land of Judah. But then in chapter 12, verse 4, we learn of the king of Egypt, Shishak, who comes against God's people because they've been unfaithful. And he took the fortified cities of Judah and came as far as Jerusalem. So it didn't matter, ultimately, because of the unfaithfulness, that the cities were defensible. Oftentimes, what we think we're doing in war, and we may be doing what we want, but the Lord is working as well, and he may not be working the way we think he is. So God simply gave parts of Judah over to Egypt at that time as punishment for their idolatrous ways. However, here, back into chapter 27 with Jotham, verse 5, after he has fortified some more, he goes to war against the Ammonites. The Ammonites are a people on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Really, if you look at the map, you've got the Sea of Kinnereth, or the Sea of Galilee, at the northern edge of the Jordan River, and then the Salt Sea at the southern edge of it. Ammon would be to the east of the Jordan River, like the actual Jordan River. So you've got Moab would be an example of a place to the east of the Salt Sea. Going north of that, and even closer to the Sea of Kinnereth, is where the Ammonites lived. And so it's against these people that he goes to war, and they're going to pay him tribute for 3 years. And so what's in the tribute? Well, 3 gifts: silver, wheat, and barley. So silver, a sign of wealth. 100 talents. A talent's 75 pounds, so that's 7,500 pounds of silver, which is roughly $2.4 million worth of silver today. 10,000 cores of wheat and 10,000 cores of barley. So for food, right? 10,000 cores. A core is 220 liters. So that brings you to 2.2 million liters here. Translating that into gallons, just under 4 liters in a gallon, 582,000 gallons worth of wheat and of barley each. I like to translate into gallons because, well, I have children and they drink gallons of milk all the time. So it's a measurement that I can wrap my mind around a little more easily than a core. But that's the picture here. So it's a lot. It's a sizable amount of tribute that they pay to the king for those 3 years. Jotham became mighty. Why? It's a good family conversation, right? Why did Jotham become mighty? It's not because the Ammonites gave him all that wealth, right? Read the rest of verse 6. Jotham became mighty because, there's your answer to the why question, because he ordered his ways before Yahweh his God. I don't have to point you to any one place in particular, but because there are several, I mean, it's really more than several. It's throughout the Pentateuch or the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, where God has taught that if his people will follow his ways, if they will listen to his statutes, if they will obey his commandments, they will live long in the land. If you want one example, Leviticus 18:5, you shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them. I am Yahweh. I mean, that's his Old Testament command. It's his Old Testament instruction, is that we would follow him, that we would be faithful to him, and if so, he would bless us. You see this reflected in the 4th commandment, the idea of entering the promised land and obeying the Lord's commandments. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land that Yahweh your God is giving you. So the Lord blessing his nation, the Lord blessing his king when they act faithfully. And here the king is acting faithfully, so the Lord has provided for him. The Lord has strengthened him. It doesn't always work that way in the New Testament era of God's kingdom. Whereas now, oftentimes our faithfulness will be responded to with hatred by the world. Why? Because Christ came. The Savior came. The one who would restore all things. He has come. And the world saw him, and it rejected him. And Jesus warns us that just as the world hated him, so it will hate us. So, verse 6 is not a prescription of what life should be like for us, that if we order our ways after God, everything will go well. I mean, there's something to it, right? If you follow the 10 Commandments, if you don't kill your neighbor, if you don't, cheat on your neighbor, on your spouse with your neighbor, things will go better for you in some ways, yes, but there's no promise of that, right? That's the difference. So it's a prescription. So it's a description here. God is describing for us what has happened rather than a prescription saying that if you do this, it will happen for you the same way. So caution on that. All right, we can mostly just get a repetition here. The Jotham's acts are recorded in the books of Kings of Israel and Judah, which may be the book of Kings. Hard to say for sure. He's 25 years old, reigns 16 years, and then he sleeps with his fathers. They bury him in the city of David. Not mention that he's buried in the tombs of the kings, but he's buried in Jerusalem. And then Ahaz will reign in his place. And Ahaz is a much more well-known king than Jotham, but we'll take a look at that tomorrow.